Now, these cocoa beans have no semblance of a taste or smell of chocolate whatsoever. Very citric and sweet. Very clean to the sense of taste as well as smell. Now notice a thick wall pod. 90% of the weight is in the pod itself. Some of the wall structures can be as much as a ½ inch thick. Now, Mother Nature designed the pod that way because she wanted to entomb the beans in an airtight container. So none of the atmospheric condition could penetrate through that thick wall of the pod and adversely affect the condition of those beans before they were officially opened. Now, Mother Nature also decided to put a white slimy coating on every bean. It's a sugar yeast mucilage coating known as Puma, P-U-M-A. Mother Nature put that white slimy coating on every bean for a reason, and she knew as man evolved through the years, they would eventually figure it out, and they did. Beans are now exposed to the environment, and in the environment is the oxygen. The oxygen in the environment becomes the catalyst that precipitates the yeast in the coating to start converting sugar to alcohol to CO2. That's your basic fermentation chemical reaction. The subtle byproduct of that chemical reaction is heat. So as these beans are now exposed to the environment as well as the oxygen, they will eventually start to ferment. And as they start the fermentation, Mother Nature's given each one of these beans the ability to take the byproduct of heat from the chemical reaction and direct that heat to the surface of the bean, creating a surface heat known as ectothermal energy. Mother Nature gave these beans the ability, once they're exposed to the environment, to heat themselves up for one reason: to take that white coating off. Now, once the coating is off, it reveals a rusty colored shell, which you can attest by the beans in the dryer, and under the shell is the pure meat of the chocolate, known as the chocolate nib, N-I-B. That is the pure meat of the chocolate. I'd like to pass that around, you can. Now, the nib is what goes in your body when you eat chocolate. That's what chocolate is made out of. It's also, and it's very healthy to eat the chocolate in its pure, unadulterated, natural form. A lot of people like to take the broken nib, pop it in their mouth like peanuts, and chew it right up. Very healthy to eat it that way. There are also two strong stimulants in the nib, caffeine and theobromine. 0.5% is caffeine. So when you eat chocolate, you get that little kick of caffeine. But the major kick comes from a very strong stimulant known as theobromine. That's how it gets its scientific name, theobromine per pound. Theobromine is 2 to 3% by weight of the cocoa bean. Theobromine reacts adversely to certain body temperatures, can induce migraine headaches. We had a lady from Denver a couple of weeks back. She says, ordinarily I do not eat chocolate because I don't relish an opportunity to experience a headache. But she says, you're telling me this is special chocolate, so I want to go on record as sampling. She had a piece of chocolate in one hand and a Tylenol in the other. And as soon as she put it on her palate, she started experiencing a dull headache. 20% of the world does not eat chocolate. And it's not by choice, it's due to the adverse effects of a very strong stimulant in chocolate known as theobromine. Now that's the downside effect of theobromine, the headaches. The upside effect of theobromine also can incite the libido, makes you romantically inclined. That's why gentlemen give chocolate to ladies all the time.
Are we smelling some kind of, isn't there a yeasty smell in there?
Yeah, we have beans fermenting.
Oh, okay.
Now this is the cocoa placenta. This is what the beans were attached to for 65 days internally in the pod for ripening while on the tree. This is al dente in texture, very citric and sweet, and people eat these as snacks throughout the Ecuadorian belt region of the world. In fact, we eat some of these every 2 weeks when we extract the bean. Alden Brown was here last year from the Food Channel, and he was doing a shoot for his last episode of Good Eats on the Food Channel, and he deemed it Good Eats chocolate. And we introduced Alden Brown to these placentas, and he really liked them. But he said they would be even better dipped in chocolate. Now the Forastero bean is a larger bean. This is the Forastero, this is the Criolla bean. Mother Nature said, well, the larger beans, specifically the Forastero, should have a nice heavy-duty coating of Puma. She put a thick coating on it. Takes 6 to 8 days to ferment the Forastero bean. Criollo beans, a smaller bean, more rounded like a large peanut. And she said, well, you know, the smaller bean really doesn't need a thick coating. She put a very thin coating on the Criollo bean. Only takes 4 days to ferment the Criollo bean. Now, whether it's the Forastero, the Criollo, or the hybrid Trinitar, cacao beans are aromatic. They will absorb odors and fragrances in their immediate environment. So when the beans go into these wooden boxes, the wood cannot be made of a pine wood. If it is made of a pine wood, beans actually will absorb the resin or the turpentine right out of the wood. If it's a redwood, it's going to absorb the tannins. If it's an oak wood, the bean's going to assume an oaky flavor. That's the Geico Gecko. You see him on TV? British accent, he sells auto insurance. So you have to use a natural and treated wood when you ferment cacao beans. And this is a natural and treated wood. It's a mahogany wood. Mahogany is a little more expensive than conventional wood, but it's a more durable wood. Now you can see when we build these boxes, we use 1-to-4 planks, so we can stack the planks. As we stack them, we separate them, create openings between all the sides of the box as well as the bottom. Now we've learned that each bean, once it's exposed to the environment, has the ability to generate its own surface heat. So when we put these beans in these boxes, this will demonstrate how they go in there. We take 5-gallon buckets and just pour them into the box. And as we pour them in there, they assume a bulk configuration. Each bean is touching each other, and each bean is generating its own surface heat. So it's kind of like the composting, known as sweating the cocoa beans. And these are also referred to as sweat boxes. So the beans have the ability to generate their own surface heat once they're exposed to the environment to sweat their white coatings off. Now, what distinguishes the Forastero from the Criollo are not only the shape and size, but also the test of the bean. The test of the Forastero bean is purple. The test of the Criollo bean is white. So we have the purple, and we have the white. Yep, you got them both. There we go. And that will show you the difference between the Forastero and the Criollo. Criollo has a white center, where the Forastero has a beautiful purple center. And that is characteristic of the Forastero and Criollo. Now, oh, excuse me.
Thank you.
Okay, again, that's the Forastero, the purple, and the Criollo, the white. Forastero has a thicker coating, where the Criollo has a very thin veil coating. Try to not get me in the picture. I'm in the witness protection program. All right. Oh, do you need a picture? Now, you can see when the Forastero fully ferments and oxidizes, it goes from that purple almost to a black chocolate. This has a traditional chocolate flavor, about 85% of the world's chocolate. Now, the Criollo bean goes to more of a mahogany colors. This guy has a nutty, earthy flavor, and less than 10 to 15 or less of the chocolate comes from the Criollo. So the Criollo is a rare kind of chocolate. Now, when the beans come out of the fermenter, they stink. They smell like dirty socks. And people say, you know, I can't believe chocolate stinks like this, but this is a bacteria aerating process. This is known as putrefaction. All those funky activities going on in that box, and the beans are exposed to all those little funky activities. So the beans have no choice but to inherit the odor. Once we present the beans to the environment, odor goes away in a couple of days. Beans also come out of the fermenter plump in moisture. We have to take the moisture content from 50 down to 7. It takes 22 to 28 days in the constant sunshine. Now we know from when given batches of beans have had 22 days of consistent sunshine, we know we're approaching 7% moisture. That's when we utilize a moisture analyzer. And when the analyzer analyzes the moisture content at 7% or slightly under, at that point we can burlap bag and store the cocoa beans. Cocoa beans at 7% or less in moisture can be stored for years. Now this is where the industry picks up. They don't have to worry about any growing, fermenting, drying whatsoever. They have contracts with growers that do all the growing for them. They send their buyers out, they just buy tons of beans and they make tons of chocolate. But we do it all. Now there are 5 steps to convert a cocoa bean into an edible piece of chocolate. Cleaning, roasting, winnowing, conching, and tempering. Cleaning does not mean washing the beans. You're removing extraneous matter. It can be organic, solid matter. First step, removing the impurities. Second step, roasting. That's where we seize and lock the flavor inside the cocoa beans. When the beans come out of the roaster, they're toasty in color, but that rusty color shell is still intact. The shell is where all the bacteria is, and it's virtually indigestible. So the FDA requires that shell to be cleanly removed. Now we're at step 3, and the third step is known as winnowing the cocoa beans. Now if you ever go into Whole Foods, other gourmet grocery stores, a chocolate shop, and buy a nib to snack on, put it in your yogurt, put it in your smoothies, put it over your ice cream, put it over your salad, whatever you want to do with it. You never see whole bean nib on the market. It's always sold in pieces. And the reason nib is always sold in pieces, integral part of a winnower is a breaker. So we pass the fragile, brittle, roasted bean shell intact through a breaker. The breaker will break the beans into a commingled material shell and nib. The shell's aerodynamic, the nib is heavy. When the commingled material emits from the breaker, drops on a vibrating sieve, advances forward, very shortly comes on the office with these vacuum tubes. They're called calibrated aspirators. When that aerodynamic shell and heavy nib passes beneath those calibrated aspirators, those aspirators are being calibrated to lift the aerodynamic shell up and away. The nib being heavy will not lift, drops into a tray. So that's how you get the shell away from cocoa beans. It's called winnowing the cocoa beans. Once we get all the pieces of chocolate free of shell, we're now at step 4 and we're ready to make chocolate. We use a procedure known as conching. You'll see the conch when you go through the factory. It's a pivotal piece of equipment that not only makes the chocolate but also attains what is known as texture. It takes 18 hours to make the chocolate. Now once the chocolate is finished being made, it's thick like loose fudge, so we have to liquefy it. We add a soy emulsifier known as lecithin. Then we add vanilla. Now on this island on the Hamakua coast in Pauila grows one of the best vanillas in the world. It's Hawaiian vanilla. I think it's the best because it's Hawaiian. But we can't use it because Jim Reddycop, who grows it, only has an extract. Extract has an alcohol base. The conch through friction electroheat generates temperatures 300 degrees. Mix heat with alcohol, volatilization occurs. So the conching procedure requires powdered vanilla. Jim has chosen not to do a powder. So we're presently importing bourbon vanilla from Madagascar. It's a very expensive powder form vanilla. But you have to use the very best vanillas in premium chocolate for number 1, proper flavor enhancement, and number 2, a good quality vanilla will give a life force to your chocolate. Meaning, if you buy your favorite premium chocolate, no matter where you live in the world, you're going to pay good money for it. But it has a shelf life of 4 to 5 years. You do not have to eat it for 4 or 5 years. No one has ever come to this little factory and say, I'll always leave my chocolate on the shelf for maybe 4 or 5 hours or 4 or 5 minutes. Now we don't make white chocolate because white chocolate is not chocolate. White chocolate is extruded yellow cocoa butter, sugar, milk, and vanilla. FDA allows them to call it chocolate because you're eating a component of the cocoa bean. But you're not eating the nib of the chocolate, you're eating a yellow butter that's been squeezed out of the cocoa bean. Cocoa butter and cocoa powder comes from specialized facilities. They're known as expeller facilities. No such facilities of that sort in the state of Hawaii. So we can't do Hawaiian white chocolate even if we wanted to because we have no way to obtain 100% Hawaiian cocoa butter. So that's why we just do the milk and dark Hawaiian chocolates. Once the chocolate's finished being made in the conch, we temporarily store it. And then we're now the 5th step, or final step of doing chocolate, known as tempering. Tempering is where you physically move the chocolate, start cooling the chocolate. When chocolate cools, the constituent of cocoa butter likewise cools. When cocoa butter cools, it always forms stable and unstable cocoa butter crystals. We have to have all stable. The way we attain that is to physically move the chocolate very slowly, cool it very slowly. When an unstable cocoa butter crystal forms as it cools very slowly, and it continues to cool very slowly, the unstable crystals will eventually realign their molecular configuration from an unstable quality to a stable quality. Gives you all stable cocoa butter crystals. That's what gives chocolate a nice satin sheen, a nice snap when you break it, and it also facilitates it coming out of the molds you put it into. And ladies and gentlemen, we finally have a finished product. From the tree to little bite-sized flowers, we call those our plumeries. You had those as tasters earlier. We have a larger flower known as the Plumeri Nui Loa, individually boxed, makes real nice individual gifts. We have embossed pounds, truffle magnet, fudge sauce, all kinds of good stuff. We also have a DVD called Chocolate is Aloha. because everything I've discussed today, however, is done in much better taste. Has a nice Hawaiian lady's over voice, beautiful slack key guitar music, and beautiful singing. And you actually see the chocolate being made on the video. So